Thank you for joining with me. We are reading Ken Wapnick's journey through the text of A Course in Miracles. We are on Chapter 4, The Illusions of God, and this is the ego sphere of the atonement principle. Being is completely without these distinctions. Being/knowledge is the non-specific state of abstraction. As there is no distinctiveness in heaven, no separated beings known as God and Christ. We use these dualistic names to express the unified relationship between God and Himself in terms we as dualistic creatures can understand. In truth, however, because the divine extensions never leave their source, Creator and created are one and not distinct from each other. We are ready now for the passages that focus specifically on the ego sphere of the atonement principle, or better, the ego sphere of the mind's choosing the atonement principle. The decision-making mind can choose the ego or the Holy Spirit, and the ego's terrified concern is that recognizing his choosing the thought system of specificity was a mistake, the son would change his mind and choose to remember the sonship in its non-specific abstract state. This would herald the end of the ego's existence, and this most important dynamic is the source of the ego's thought system. We have discussed this before, but we'll examine it in more detail, as we find here in the first place in A Course in Miracles, where the ego's strategy is exposed, yet this strategy makes no sense without understanding the ego's fear, which in turn makes no sense without first seeing the ego's fear of the atonement principle. The separation, hence the ego, never occurred. This is the text. Nothing can reach spirit from the ego, and nothing can reach the ego from spirit. Spirit can neither strengthen the ego nor reduce the conflict within it. This is Ken. Spirit and ego represent mutually exclusive states. Spirit does not know of the ego, and one does not reduce the conflict of something that does not exist. That is why, as we will see repeatedly throughout the text, we are urged by Jesus not to fight against the ego. When we fight against something, we obviously make it real. Spirit does not fight against the ego, nor does it seek to change or correct it. An illusion is simply what it is, and by learning to choose spirit, we inevitably bring about the ego's demise. Nothing need be done with the ego's inherent nothingness except withdraw our belief in it. This is the text. The ego is a contradiction. Yourself and God's self, capital S, are in opposition. They are opposed in source, in direction, and in outcome. They are fundamentally irreconcilable because spirit cannot perceive and the ego cannot know. They are therefore not in communication and can never be in communication. It is not that God's self, this is Ken, it is not that God's self, capital S, is in opposition to the ego, but that God's self and the ego's self are mutually exclusive states. In that sense, they are in opposition. However, this is not a course in reconciling opposites, a major difference between A Course in Miracles and the work of Jung, for example, who taught that wholeness comes from reconciling opposites, which means that the opposites are seen as real and need to be integrated. The Course teaches that we cannot reconcile spirit and ego, light and darkness, love and fear, because in the presence of one, the other must disappear. Everything and nothing can never be reconciled, nor can they possibly communicate with each other. This is the text. Nevertheless, the ego can learn even though its maker can be misguided. He cannot, however, make the totally lifeless out of the life given. This is another example of the atonement principle. Despite our attempts to keep the ego alive and make a body we think lives, nothing changes in what is truly alive, our reality as spirit. The statement that the ego can learn is a confusing one because the word ego is used differently here from elsewhere in A Course in Miracles, where it is almost always a synonym for wrong-minded thinking. When Jesus says here that the ego can learn, he refers to the decision-making part of the mind. He is speaking of the ego as a split mind, and the part that learns is not the wrong-minded self that cannot learn, but the mind's decision-maker. This part taught itself to believe in the ego's reality and the illusory nature of the Holy Spirit, and can now be taught to change its mind and learn that ego lies and is illusory, and the Holy Spirit is the only voice that speaks for truth. I'm going to go ahead and stop there today. I thank you so much for joining with me. I hope you have a most beautiful day, and I will see you tomorrow. I love you. Thank you.